Okay. Right. So I was pretty loud, so hopefully you heard that anyway. But I'm representing Kollective here. I'm going to be talking specifically about live events and some of the things that we do to help optimize them. So without sort of teaching anyone what they already know, we've changed in the last couple of years, but for those of us who know our name and know what we do, I'll talk a little bit about how we've become increasingly relevant over the last couple of years when, at a time, at the start of the pandemic and people were obviously home-based, there was obviously a few kind of concerned faces in my business. We're predominantly around to distribute content for people who are in the office, and people are much more hybrid now. Actually, we've seen acceleration in our customer base, and I'll come on to why that is. But really, this is the business challenge that we face. Okay, so we are there not to optimize everyday Teams meetings, but the large-scale broadcast events that have, potentially tens of thousands of people on them, and that could be using Teams, could be using Stream currently, but certainly our number one use case is Teams. And the reason is because the kind of events that we optimize absolutely are business critical to the people running the business. So the business challenge is that you must, as a CEO, get your message across. You must be relevant and do so without any impact to the services that you're running already, or without any sort of buffering or impact to the quality that your users are expecting. And they're expecting a high quality event when their CEO is on stage. And so the problem statement as it is this, right? You've got your normal network usage and capacity, but you run one of these large-scale town halls and suddenly you see a big spike on the network, and that doesn't just impact the event that you're running, but potentially everything else that's on there. And so, I got a call from a French organization yesterday who ran one of these things last week as the return to office has ramped up. And they had lots of problems, and it wasn't just with the event that they were running. They had lots of problems everywhere, and they want to do their next event on Monday, and we're there to help them out and make sure that they can run that quite happily. But really, the reason why this is so much, or it's so important now, is because what we've seen during the course of the pandemic is our customer base has doubled, but there has been a 15 times increase in the number of events that we're running. So, you can do the math yourself. Every organization is running more of these events. Their senior leadership teams are staying in contact, much more so than they used to be from the sort of traditional quarterly or annual town halls. And Teams has made this easier for people to present. That really came about at the right time. And so our own customer base we've actually done pretty well through the pandemic and continue to do so. So what we're ultimately doing is solving this problem on the left-hand side, right? Which is when you're running one of these events and you've got everybody who is individually going out and sourcing the content from the CDN, then that's the consequence that you introduce to your network. So using Teams as an example, every organization or every user, the top quality currently is a 720p live event. That's 1.7 meg per user. The kind of organizations that we work with are large global organizations. If they've got 1,000 people in an office, that's a 2 gig pipe that they need to run that live event. And the nature of the kind of organizations that we work with now are, they might be running 30, 50 of these things a week and concurrent, and they don't want to be able to manage them. So the way that we control the distribution of the content is by using peer-to-peer. So conceptually what we do is very simple. We say, every user is requesting the same segments. We can take advantage of the Teams client or any browser, and we can leverage WebRTC functionality within that browser as a way to distribute the content that each user is requesting. And so we go from a situation of 1,000 users requiring a 2 gig pipe through to 1,000 users requiring just a few meg in order to manage that event. So we have more than just simple use cases. So the one that I just showed you is sort of this one up here. It's just the large number of users in the office. And that's something that, predominantly would be the number one call that comes to us to say, we're experiencing network bandwidth issues, and how can we help with this? And so the way that things have extended is beyond that, and now kind of organizations that we work with, these large enterprises, they're sort of, they're oil tankers, they're slow to move, and it can take many years to adopt modern network practices. So a backhaul network, we've got lots of financial organizations on our customer base, likes of HSBC, Lloyds, Bank of America, those kind of organizations. Typically will be running a backhaul network, potentially thousands of branches, and that creates a capacity challenge, not just in the wide area network, but also at the central egress, and I'll come on to that a little bit more in a second. Likewise with tunneled users, there's lots of organizations, especially the very security conscious organizations who won't split tunnel their VPN users. They'll still be using an element of tunneling. They're probably looking at adopting some kind of SASE type solution, but again, that might take them 3 years to distribute. So helping to reduce the need and kind of double bandwidth requirements for those users is something else that we can help manage. And then increasingly, one of the things that we've seen much more of, especially with Microsoft and adoption, is how can we manage content in very, very difficult places to control, like China. And so inside of China, there's no Microsoft true presence. There's the Great Firewall that you have to contend with. There's the regulation that you have to try and make your own way around, and helping to distribute content in that environment also is something that we come across. So, and we'll talk a little bit about zero trust as well. So this is something that we're starting to see more adoption on. Lots of organizations have been using things like Zscaler ZPA at home for a long time. We're starting to see that be adopted more in the office now, and the implications that has for impacting what has traditionally been our peer-to-peer delivery. So what is an enterprise content delivery network? Well, from our perspective, it kind of consists of 3 methods of delivery. So the first and our number one use case by far is an agentless mechanism. So historically, and we've been around for 20 years, the smarts weren't there to be able to do this agentless, and now they are. So we had an agent. Our plan in 2018 was that we would be able to deliver content as cleverly as we used to be able to do with an agent, but in an agentless way. And the way, or the enabler that allowed us to do that was that browsers got much smarter. And your Teams client is just another browser. It is on the same Chromium engine, so we can leverage functionality that is within that browser as a way to help us distribute that content. And basically what happens here is that when you connect to an event, you load an SDK. That SDK is automatically distributed. It's just JavaScript that allows us to register, and I'll come on to that in just a second. So we have an agentless solution, we have an agented solution. So where does an agent help? And typically it helps in a decreasing use case, which is video on demand. So when we first came around, live events didn't exist. Video on demand was the primary use case. But we still see lots of organizations distributing content with video on demand, or those kind of financial organizations who have very high branch counts and want to distribute content in a way that is not going to impact the network, is delivered via peer-to-peer within the branch, and we can do so by using an agent. We can cache content to disk. That's really the difference between these two things. Here we're governed by what the browser allows us to do, and it doesn't allow us to do that much. with an agent we can do much more, and so we can discover things about the network. We can start to take advantage of being able to cache content to disk and retrieve content from disk, and so that allows us additional use cases, and one of those is video on demand. Another one is things like file delivery, and that's one of the areas that we're looking at for future developments at the moment. And then the third kind of distribution mechanism that works with either of the first two is an appliance-sourced delivery. And this is very valid, and I'll tell you why in the next slide. But kind of what this is doing is with an appliance, we've almost gone back to on-premise caching proxies. So historically, organizations started off with web proxies to cache content and reduce their own network utilization. They became, as encryption got more complex, the proxy just became an authentication and security appliance to stop caching content. And then, of course, they've now become cloud-based with Global Protect and Zscaler and all the other ones that are out there. So we've actually kind of reversed that trend, and that helps in some of the use cases that we have. So many of the organizations that I work with will have a combination of network topologies. So this is ultimately where they're starting to go or have already gone. So SD-WAN technologies allow for local breakout in a way that's secure, but they don't solve that 1,000 users in an office. So that's where we can take advantage of peer-to-peer as a way to reduce the egress utilization at that particular site. Then we've got sort of more traditional network topologies with the MPLS network via some kind of regional or central breakout. So most organizations I work with would have breakouts in Europe, the US, and Asia somewhere. And this is the retail or the financial network that's potentially hundreds or thousands of branch locations. And so we can solve the wide area network challenge here within the branch, so basically solving this link here by using peer-to-peer. But if they've got thousands of users, thousands of branches, this can become a new bottleneck for them if all of those are connecting to events at the same time. And it's not really in ours or the organization's interest to start having offices in a sort of semi-uncontrolled way distributing content between them. They're already asking us to protect this link here. They don't want to start using a branch office as a source for another branch office. So that's where our appliance-based solution comes in. And so if an organization can't cope with that central breakout, we can bring in what's called an edge cache, and then that becomes the caching solution for that organization. Okay. Likewise, split tunneled remote users, that's no problem for us. We have multiple ways to recognize when a user's at home. We can take advantage of VPN pool addressing. We can take advantage of things like the ability to connect to various web URLs, and we can make decisions based on that. So you can use your Zscaler home policy to restrict URLs. We can work with that as a way to identify that someone's at home and disable any kind of peer-to-peer. But again, lots of our customers, or a number of our customers certainly, would still be using tunneled access, and that creates a double challenge. They've got to come into the network and then go back out in order to source that content. So again, using an appliance can really massively reduce that central pipe coming in. And then this is the problem with China. So for those of you who have offices out in China, you'll be well aware of the challenges, and there's how you cope with that. There's how you cope with the cost of things like premium rate internet access out there. What lots of organizations will do, they'll still manage some kind of MPLS network in China for their offices, but they'll route around the firewall through Singapore and Hong Kong. Have always been the breakouts there, although Hong Kong increasingly has concerns. So your own regulations tell you what you can and what you can't do, but the kind of premium rate access in China that's going to allow you to connect to an event is hugely expensive, and almost you've created that sort of bank link just here, that because you're paying a huge premium for quite a small link out here, you have to reduce the amount of traffic that's going through it. And so again, a combination of peer-to-peer and edge cache can help solve that, providing you can get the connectivity out. So organizations who have just not been able to connect to live events in China are now doing so, and we provide the technology that helps them do so. And then finally, the sort of zero trust type SASE solutions. So there's two ways you can solve that. You can create an exception. That's how most organizations would do so at the moment. Again, we can bring in an appliance to do that, and one of the large pharmaceuticals has just taken us up on this. So they're they have tunneled users in all their offices. They're deploying a whole bunch of appliances as a way to manage this. Multicast traditionally would have been a way that you could get around it, but you have to use agents and things like that for that. You've got to maintain an agent. You've got to keep it up to date. The kind of organizations that are used to doing this, they've already created a mechanism, and that mechanism might be on the sort of the CPE device. It's just a VM. It's just a sort of mini farm. They can just load an appliance on there and very quickly use that as a way to distribute and make efficient the content within their site. Okay. So slightly deeper dive, but I'm going to keep this reasonably shallow. I might jump over this side here. So what's actually happening in the back end is there's something within Teams and within all our partners where there is a front-end integration with us. So we're not just there sniffing packets, hoping that we can find something that we can distribute. It is an agreement between the customer, ourselves, and the front-end provider that says when you connect to an event, you're going to be triggered as a user to go through an additional process. And so this additional process pulls in our API, so it's just an SDK that you run on your machine in a way that the user is completely unaware that anything's going on. That triggers an authentication and authorization process that we're matching things like security tokens that have been retrieved here that are shared on that channel before us, so that we can't start bringing in users as a way to distribute content to them if they're not authorized to receive it. And then you're basically making you're advertising your availability so that when other users run through this same process here, they are able to recognize that this machine here is available to start sourcing segments and requesting content from. So all users run through this process. Ultimately, they then build a mesh. And so the mesh is on site. We've got controls in place that say how deep this can go, how wide it can go, how many machines each user can set up a direct relationship with. And in that way, if you're this user here, when you're requesting content, you're making that request of the machines that you've already established a connection with in your environment to say, can you source this segment to me? If you can, great. It will do so. If not, then this machine can fail back to the CDN and source the content directly itself. So in that way, we're working with the buffer in the player to say, the buffer's in charge of requesting what rate it needs to use, keeping itself up to a necessary level of content. And if this machine here goes, it's not a single point of failure. He's already ahead, he's already got some buffered content. It will just start requesting new segments directly while it reestablishes itself in the mesh and sets up new relationships, and that basically happens across the board. So within the network itself, we obviously need some communication between machines. This is why I had the zero trust element separately, but we're just using WebRTC protocol, which is DTLS, and there's an additional level of encryption going on between these machines based on that protocol there. There are some organizations that won't allow this to be open. Interestingly, they're ones that generally have been a victim of some kind of malware, and that's where we can bring in things like agents or edge caches as a way to reduce the requirements on the user's machine, or reduce the port requirements that need to be open between those machines. And of course, we give a view that means that you know what's going on in your environment. So from our perspective, we're saying there's always two different views of an event. There's the business view that says, I just want to know how many people connected to this thing. I want to know what their experience was like. I want to know where they were and how long they were connected for. Those are my engagement metrics. And then there's the network stats that says, okay, I want to know on a per site basis or even potentially on a per user basis, where was I sourcing my content from? What did it look like? How can I help troubleshoot this stuff? Where were my sites that had the big problems? And even some people get very excited by this kind of stuff where they see, okay, let's bring up a map on how that was distributed in their environment. So, and then from our perspective, and I'm conscious of time, I've only got 2 more minutes here, so we make it as easy as we possibly can, so everything's in the control of the customer, so we're not a black box solution. Historically, the kind of stuff that we do is seen as one, but the way that we allow organizations to connect and run this is absolutely, they log on to a portal that's immediately integrated with their own tenant O365 ID. They set up the integrations, we provide the tokens to them, we provide the instructions to them. They run a network wizard that allows them to put some default configurations in place, and if they want to define things further, they can do so, and then obviously they can just run and analyze their events and optimize as they need to based on the analytics that we provide. And one of the things that they do is something like this, where it's a large-scale capacity test, so something whereby you can run an event with, potentially distributed to every user in your organization. We don't care if they're at home, we don't care if they're in the office. The network readiness test allows you to run an event in a hidden way on the user's machine, process the data accordingly as if it's a live event, and you can then build up the confidence that you're good to run these large-scale events in your own organization. Okay, and I guess there's 2 final ones from me. So these are the kind of customers that we work with. So, very strong in these large global organizations. So our largest customer is Accenture, over 600,000 users. Organizations like Nestle have been a customer of ours for over a decade. But across every vertical, we have representation and really strong customer relationships. The majority of our customers, we build a strong relationship with them. We get to renew them. We have a high renewal rate with them, and this is what Microsoft say about us. So this is David Totten, the CTO. So not the most technical definition you'll ever see, but it's this is him trying to demonstrate to Microsoft themselves our own differentiators over some of their own stuff. And what he says is true. We just sit there in the background. You can adopt us. We don't grab the content, but it's the users grab it, transfer it, and it does just work, and that's what we see, and very successfully. So it's a super quick whistle-stop tour. Normally, with some network people on the line, that can be a 90-minute workshop, and we get much more detailed in use cases and things like that. But happy to take any questions, and obviously we're out there somewhere as well. So everyone's too stunned.
We got the nice soft mic for anybody who wants to talk into it.
Throw it. I'm not taking it unless you throw it. Just what's the sort of starting point? Where do people? Where's that tipping point from it just being a standard Teams event to needing this type of thing? Where do you normally see that starting?
Yeah. So typically, organizations that we work with will generally be aware that they already have an issue. Okay. So it is. In a way, I'm kind of lucky. So my own background, I used to work for network resellers and that kind of stuff, and you're fighting for every customer. And we have an advantage that, most of the front-end providers and Microsoft will tell you you need an ECDN to run large events at scale. Okay, and Microsoft do some odd things. They've released these large-scale Teams meetings that you can get 1,000 interactive users on. I don't know many organizations that want that, but some do. they've created this overflow function because they know that that's a challenge for organizations, but they've missed a step that says, actually, I need my overflow threshold to be configurable. I don't just want to have 1,000 interactive users and then have everyone as a streaming user beyond that. But yeah, the short answer is you probably know if you've got an issue already. If you don't know that you've got an issue, frankly, you probably don't need us.
So they've already felt the pain by that point, right?
Sorry?
They've already felt the pain.
In almost every single case, they felt the pain, or there's a combination. So we're always drawn across a couple of billing baskets. So there's the comms team who want to run they have the direct link to the CEO people. There's the Microsoft 365 people who are just trying to run these things probably at a smaller scale. And then there's the network people. And the network people are the ones that are complaining. So the other two groups to say, go and find a solution, because my alternate option is that I've got to go and take 6,000 branch locations and increase the bandwidth there. And that's a multi-year, very expensive project, and we can be up and running within the same week.
Anyone else want the cube?
Okay. Thank you. There's a queue for the next one, so thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you.